The amount of stab wounds and the force that was used was a very violent attack.
A brutal killing.
She didn't deserve this. She was totally innocent.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
She had come into a lump sum of money not too long before her murder. He seemed to have been communicating with a number of other women.
This guy is a cold-blooded sociopath.
I've never had any suspect be able to give me the chills like he did.
The truth will be revealed.
He said, "No, man, you got it all wrong." And that's when the most bizarre story poured out of him. You could not write this script for a movie.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. "80 miles west of Detroit lies the city of Jackson, Michigan.
It's a blue-collar working town, and it's a very hard-working town.
It's a really safe, nice community. It was routine for neighbors not to lock their doors and for kids to just play in the yard, and everyone felt very safe out there.
I need somebody outside my house right now. My fiance, I think she's dead.
Nick?
There's blood everywhere.
Do you know where it's coming from?
I don't know.
Okay, can you tell if she's breathing?
She's not. She's cold. She's dead. She's dead. Oh my God.
The victim is identified as 28-year-old Frances Craig.
I was out mowing the lawn, and my wife was in the house. And she came out screaming with the phone in her hand. She couldn't talk. I went into like a shock. Frances was exceptionally good mom. She was independent. She wanted to do everything herself. She was pulling 2 jobs and taking care of her children. She was going to school, and she was about a month away from getting her associate's degree in marketing when this happened.
Frances was going to get married in the fall of 2014. She was living with her fiancé, Eric Wolf, who had a child of his own, soon to be her stepdaughter.
They had just moved into this home, their dream home, the home they wanted to raise their girls in and be a happy family. She was so incredibly loved.
Detectives Andrew Sullivan and Brian Huttenlocker, along with prosecutors Katie Razmirsky and Kelsey McKinney, are assigned to the case.
We want to track all of Frances's movement for the previous 24 hours to see if there was any type of confrontation or any type of disagreement she had to give somebody a reason to murder her.
When I arrived on scene, they pointed me in the direction of Eric Wolf, who was the fiancé of the victim and also the 911 caller. During Mr. Wolf's interview, we asked him basically for a timeline. Mr. Wolf informed us that he worked an overnight shift at a local factory. He said he had been at work that evening from 6 p.m. till 6 in the morning. Stated he had found her not breathing, unresponsive, and indicated dispatch that she was deceased. When I entered the master bedroom where Frances Craig was located, the first thing that caught my eye was the bed was askew from the wall.
The bed had a large pool of blood on it.
It did appear like there was some type of struggle.
We did observe zip ties on the victim's left wrist. The victim appeared to have been stabbed several times in the neck and chest area. And that's where all the blood was coming from.
The way that she was killed was a brutal, seemingly very angry stabbing.
It was really hard for them to determine which were stab wounds and which were slash wounds. She had so many of them, and they were overlapping, all on her neck and into her shoulder area, collarbone area. Over 20 stab and slash wounds.
Also appeared that she had been gagged, and it appeared to be some type of scarf.
She had a robe on, but her robe was pushed up over the lower part of her body. The investigators needed to take all of these things, preserve them for prints and DNA, send them up to the lab.
As the forensic analysis gets underway, police examine the rest of the residence.
There appeared to have been no forced entry. It appears that no one or nothing else in that house was disturbed. So robbery doesn't seem to have been in play here. There seemed to be an emotion that went along with the killing that you typically only associate with a loved one or someone known very well to your victim.
It was something that was up close and personal.
This warrants a more detailed examination of her fiancé's story.
Eric stated that he left work shortly after 6. He stopped at a local fast food restaurant and then continued on home.
Eric saw her lying on the floor.
He thought that maybe she had had too much to drink and thought she had just passed out in that condition. We didn't completely buy that. Even if they thought they were drunk and passed out, they would still try to shake them to make sure they're okay.
But he made a decision to just close the door and walk away from that scene. At some point thereafter, Franny's daughters went to the bedroom. We know, unfortunately, that they saw her in the position that she was ultimately found. The girls then went downstairs and were able to get Eric fully awake and to let him know that something was very, very wrong.
Eric's interview raises a series of troubling questions.
Franny's last text to Eric was at 12:42 a.m. Something about the children and not being in bed.
We did consult with the Michigan State Crime Lab, And they did note that by looking at the blood, that Frances had been dead for several hours. So we know it happened sometime after midnight, but before he had said he'd first located her shortly after 6 in the morning.
He then called the police at 10:55 in the morning.
So it had been a period of time as Frances lay dead on her bedroom floor before 911 was called.
Police bring Eric into the station for further questions.
He wasn't super emotional, as in when somebody loses a close one. So we took that as kind of a clue.
A lot of things that Eric said didn't add up to us.
At some point in the interview, he makes a statement asking if she might have committed suicide.
That was the question. That didn't make any sense either. She was a happy, hardworking, on the cusp of great things kind of a gal, about to graduate, about to be married, had 3 young kids.
So he gave lots of contradictory statements.
Eric was suspect number 1.
Confusing statements to police have made Frances Craig's fiancé, Eric Wolf, the first suspect in her murder.
He adamantly denied he had anything to do with it, and so the investigators were still trying to find anything to really link him to the crime.
Detectives examine the couple's relationship.
It appeared that both Frances and Eric had a lot of stress going on at this time. Eric was working 12-hour shifts, and Franny was taking care of the children and also working 2 jobs. We did learn of a couple incidents where other people had heard Frances and Eric arguing. Family members had seen them get in a pretty heated argument about how to discipline or raise one of the children.
Eric, he always knew the answer. You didn't know anything. You know, and it didn't seem like you respected women.
They might have just been at wit's end with each other and very stressed out about the upcoming wedding. One of them could have been having second thoughts.
They look to their digital lives for more clues.
Technology and internet open up a whole new chapter in how investigators investigate crimes. In this case, we got into Eric's iCloud account, we got into Franny's account, we pulled their IP addresses for their home internet to see what searches were done in their home from any devices that were connecting to that IP address.
We were able to determine from cell phone records and cell phone devices, Mr. Wolf actually had been communicating with some other females outside of the relationship.
Eric's phone records reveal he spoke with one of the women at 9:08 p.m.
Definitely appeared that he was coming across as single, not someone that was engaged to be married. We also learned that on one of the sites, he was actually using an alias, not using his real name, but exchanging pictures of himself.
There was some level of unhappiness or maybe lack of commitment on Eric's part in this relationship. It put him more firmly in the hot seat as a suspect. The detectives made contact with as many of those women as they could to determine their whereabouts in the hours leading up to this homicide, to determine what the level of their connection with Eric had been.
We were able to determine that they had no knowledge of the homicide or no involvement. In fact, we're shocked to even learn that Mr. Wolf was engaged. We we were able to rule them out as having any involvement.
They need to take a detailed look at his alibi.
Eric worked the midnight shift. But it's one thing to say I worked that shift. It's another thing to sort of determine, were you in fact at that establishment that entire period of time?
So I do go to his work, did speak with management. They do have cameras on their time clock, so I did ask if they could pull the cameras. I did view that he did in fact come in just before 6 p.m. and that he left shortly after 6 a.m.
This means Eric could not have been responsible for his fiance's murder.
So Eric, while had put himself on the top of our list, we had nothing to really tie him to the homicide.
They looked for other clues within Francis's personal life.
It was clear they had just bought this home. The detectives were interested in how did that come about, who paid for it, where did the money come from. They did find that Franny had come into a lump sum of money not too long before her murder.
Investigators dig into the source of her newfound wealth.
As they peeled back the layers of that information, what they found was that Franny had actually been assaulted in the somewhat recent past at a clothing store that she worked at.
We spoke with family and friends to see what they knew of it.
The kids were in there trying to steal stuff. And my daughter kicked them out. And then the mother of the kids started beating on my daughter and another employee that was there. They were just hitting her, knocking her down and hitting her. And I mean, she had a hard time. She couldn't even go back to that store again. She had post-traumatic shock from it.
They were criminally charged in the matter. And she ended up suing and received the large sum of money from this family.
Francis's courtroom victory only led to more bad blood.
And there were some threats made by one of the suspects. So that certainly perked my interest. They were obviously very angry with her and could have reason to want to harm or kill Francis.
There are thousands of threats that occur every day. Do we take them all seriously? It's one thing to say, I'm going to kill you. Does the victim actually believe you and feel threatened? Then it becomes a death threat and a criminal offense.
She was terrified. I mean, she didn't know what they were going to do. They just went crazy.
I went up to Lansing, met up with the detective, and she and I went over to the residence. They definitely had some disagreements with Francis. Shortly into the interview, I did reveal that Francis had been murdered. They appeared to be very surprised.
Investigators must determine if they were in the Jackson County area during the time Francis was killed.
They were able to give me a pretty detailed timeline. I did check with some cameras at the locations they said they were. Also checked with their alibi witnesses. And I was able to, through all that, verify that they were, in fact, where they said they were.
Hoping to uncover clues about Francis's attacker, investigators begin speaking with other people who she interacted with during her final day.
We know that in the early part of the day, she spent time with friends and family.
I did speak with one of her friends she had been with She remembers looking at the clock just before Francis left. The friend specifically noted she had left at 8:09 p.m. Then she went and picked up her kids.
Francis and the children, along with a family babysitter, go to the Jackson County Fair. We were able to pull some pictures off social media that she had posted from the fair and also coordinate the cell phone, GPS, that she was in fact at the fair at the exact timestamp that the photo was uploaded.
We determined that she was at the fair until about closing time, which would be just around 10 o'clock. Figured she got home close to 11 o'clock in the evening.
Through the analysis of her movements by cell phone, they uncover a new lead.
We were able to determine that she communicated with a number that appeared to be for somewhat of a lengthy period of time.
The individual was Alex, who is her ex and the father of her 2 children.
We always look into the ex-husband, boyfriend of the victim, specifically when they have children involved.
He definitely fell right into the timeline of the homicide, as the communication between them was the day before.
Makes one wonder, was there contention between the 2 of them?
Investigators were able to speak with Franny's parents in regards to Alex. It appeared that their relationship might not have been the best.
I didn't think they got along at all, like 2 normal people would, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend. She tried to make it work, but he didn't want anything to do with it, so she said the heck with it and broke off.
When you're dealing with an ex, that ex has to come up with some very powerful alibi information. Otherwise, you are looking definitely at someone who could be a suspect.
The discovery of a rocky past between Frances Craig and her former partner has made him the latest suspect in her murder.
With him having a relationship with Franny previously and also still being involved in her life, being the father of her 2 children, it was somebody that we had to investigate further and either rule him out as a suspect or continue investigating.
There is a responsibility of any investigator to follow every lead, especially where there's a suspicion the suspect lies within the family circle. Most murder victims know their killers.
For Alex, the truth lies in his timeline.
He had his cell phone with him that particular day, leading up to the homicide and during the hours of the homicide. A cell phone can tell us not just who we're communicating with at any given time. Most all of them these days place us in time and space. They ping off of different towers, and they help us know where a cell phone is location-wise. Based on that information, investigators were able to determine that Alex was nowhere in the area at the time this homicide occurred.
We were comfortable enough ruling him out as having involvement in the homicide.
So far, the most viable candidate is still her fiancé, Eric Wolf.
We had the money motive, we had the love motive, we had the outside relationship motive. So we had all these definitely fitting motives. But again, we had no hard evidence to prove those motives.
It was wildly frustrating.
As investigators, obviously our motive is justice in the end, but we also want to get closure for the family and her friends.
It was very difficult for us to go through that. Frances was a good person. She didn't deserve this. Our relationship was great with the detectives. They told us as much as they could. And I think what made us the maddest is when people would say, well, why aren't you not trying hard enough?
The investigators in this case were tireless, literally tireless. There is not a stone that they left unturned.
Detectives get word the forensic analysis has finally been completed.
I received information from the Michigan State Police Crime Lab that they were able to get a DNA hit on the zip ties that were located on Franny's left wrist. The information I received was that it was a CODIS hit, which means that it was a known offender, and it came back to a Cortez Butler.
We all just looked at each other around the table and went, who? Have you heard of this guy? Do you know this guy? Is he connected to Jackson? Is he connected to Franny? Is he connected to Eric? Does anybody know anything about Cortez Butler? And the short answer was no.
We were advised that Cortez Butler is a hitman. He'll murder anybody for the right price. And that he has murdered people throughout the country. So at that point, we want to try to link Eric to Cortez. Our thought is possibly Eric may have hired him to kill Frances.
Detectives believe they've found the hitman who murdered Frances Craig, Cortez Butler. Now they have to determine what caused her to be his target.
We didn't want to tip our hand at anything, so we kind of had to hold it close to the chest and figure out what we needed to do with this lead and how it needed to be followed up on. We wanted to make sure that when we found them that we had all of our ducks in a row, because we knew we'd probably only get one shot to see what his involvement was in our homicide.
They contacted his parole agent to find out what they could find out about him, and immediately kicked out a search warrant for information, phone records, anything they could get.
Once we got Cortez's phone records, we were able to see that he had traveled from Detroit to Jackson within that timeline of 24 hours before the homicide. We were able to watch it kind of drive down I-94 and hit off of towers as it came. But then he turned his phone off. And he turned his phone off right at the time of the murder. We were able to then pick it back up, going back down I-94. About 2:11 is when he turned his phone back on.
At that point, we now know that Cortez Butler is on Frances Craig's timeline.
So we have him in Jackson, but we still don't know what his relationship with either Eric or Franny actually is.
To find that out, they must speak to him directly.
In the middle of the night, we get a call from a captain of Detroit PD.
Detroit police have tracked down Cortez Butler.
At that point, Detective Sullivan and I jumped in our car and we drove to Detroit.
We sat down with Mr. Butler, introduced ourselves, explained where we were from to see if that would maybe get a reaction from him, knowing that we were from Jackson. asked him about any connections he'd ever had to Jackson, if he knows anyone in Jackson, if he would have any reason to travel to Jackson. He said no to all those. I slid the lab report over towards him and showing that his DNA was on the zip ties involved in our homicide. We did ask him whether he was hired by Mr. Wolf or whether he knew Mr. Wolf. Mr. Butler just kind of had a blank stare, and again, he repeated that he'd never been to Jackson. Mr. Butler was a cold individual. He showed no emotion, no reaction, and requested to return to his cell at that point.
With Butler refusing to cooperate, they must find another way of uncovering who hired him.
At Cortez's residence, among other things, several phones were located and confiscated, and ultimately they were examined.
We learned that he is having contact with one other person, and he's had contact with that person more than 200 times in a pretty short amount of time.
A search warrant is issued for that cell phone number. What comes back is that that phone is registered to an individual named, of all names in the world, Dorito Johnson.
We were pretty sure Dorito Johnson was not a real name and that someone had used a street name or a fake name for that phone. We asked our local kind of undercover drug investigators to look into this name, and they said, yes, Dorito Johnson is Clifford McKee. So Clifford was someone we then were very interested in because Clifford was also our first connection back to Jackson.
Clifford had ties to both Jackson and Detroit. And we were able to determine that there was a relationship between Clifford McKee and Cortez Butler. They had served prison time together.
If you've got an extensive criminal background and you've served time in a federal penitentiary where other people around you are in there for violent crimes, it's easier than you might think to find somebody who's willing to kill somebody else for $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000. The problem is that a person who is willing to kill somebody for money isn't necessarily a trustworthy person. You better hope that no trail ever leads back to that hitman, because once that happens, you as the person who hired him are done.
Armed with Clifford's name, investigators returned to Cortez Butler.
At this point in the investigation, we were not able to connect Mr. Butler or Clifford McKee to Eric Wolf.
That's what they needed to do. They said to him, we know you had something to do with it. There's no way around that. Your DNA is on the zip tie. You can't get past that. We think you're the guy who carried it out, but we don't think you're the guy who wanted it carried out because you don't have any connection to this. And so they said, we need your help. We have a little kid who's in danger of going back to a guy we think hired you to kill Franny. And he said, no, man, you got it all wrong. And that's when the most unexpected, unanticipated, bizarre story poured out of him that you could ever possibly imagine. You could not write this script for a movie.
Detectives have hitman Cortez Butler cornered, but they have yet to confirm who ordered the hit.
Butler started to fill us in on the whole sequence of events and who the players were in this homicide. Mr. Butler told us that he was contacted by Clifford McKee, that he knew from prison, stating that his nephew, Rodney, was in trouble in Jackson and was facing a very serious charge based on the arson that he committed. basically needed a witness to go away.
Ryan Marshall was the eyewitness to Rodney McKee's arson case. Ryan Marshall was the key to Rodney McKee going to prison.
Clifford McKee and Cortez Butler settled on a price of $10,000. $5,000 would be paid up front to kill Ryan Marshall.
As the investigators got this story from Cortez, this confession firsthand, Detective Sullivan was almost bouncing out of his chair.
Ryan Marshall and Eric Wolf were longtime friends. They were childhood friends. And at the point when Ryan's house is burnt down, he has no place to stay. Rather than putting him up in a shelter, Eric and Francis allowed him to stay with them. And then when they had bought the house, at that point, they kind of told him that we were helping you out while your house burnt down, but we're starting a family and we just can't stay here any longer. So Ryan leaves. Unfortunately, that information didn't get passed on to Cortez Butler.
Butler lays out in gruesome detail the events that transpired in the hours before Francis Craig was murdered, and how a perfect day came to a brutal end.
The 24 hours leading up to Francis's murder seemed as normal and idyllic as they could possibly have been. She spent this nice long time with friends and then was at the fair until it shut down that night.
Cortez comes over from Detroit to Jackson. His phones are hitting off of all the towers down I-94. He walks through backyards, goes through the side door of the garage.
Cortez Butler talks about looking at the time on the microwave in the kitchen at 1:42 a.m. Cortez described going all through the house looking for Ryan and not finding him. But finding Franny in her bed. He describes gagging her and binding her wrists with the zip ties and asking her about Ryan, but she kept trying to look at him. And so, in his words, he had to take her out.
Stabs her repeatedly, kills her, drags her off the bed.
And then Cortez, just as quietly as he came in, quietly leaves.
He described it so factually and so unemotionally that it appeared to not affect him at all. It was actually chilling. the calm manner in which he described it and his attitude towards it. It was surreal. I've never had any suspect be able to kind of give me the chills like he did.
He verifies that Eric Wolf had no take in it. He didn't know Eric Wolf, didn't know anything about Eric Wolf.
One of the most heartbreaking things for me about this case will always be that those little girls had to see their mother the way that they did. It's a tragedy. Sorry. Franny gets me, man.
We see a lot of really heinous crimes in our world as prosecutors. But very rarely do you have a victim who was engaged in zero risky behavior. I mean, Franny was doing nothing wrong, but at home, in her bed, taking care of those 3 little girls. And that because of 3 evil, heinous men, she had to lose her life. She's the definition of collateral damage.
On October 7th, 2015, Cortez Butler is charged with first-degree murder. Clifford McKee and Rodney McKee are also charged with soliciting murder and first-degree murder.
When we went to court, we didn't miss a minute of it. This involves my daughter. She would do it for me. It was a hard process, but at the end, the jury got it right.
They all received life sentences without the chance of parole.
Their convictions are currently under appeal.
Cortez Butler, he's got a special place in hell when he finally does die. I guarantee you that. This guy is a cold-blooded sociopath. He's just a good kid. I mean, couldn't ask for better. The detectives did a fantastic job. And all my thanks would go to them for at least giving us that peace of mind that these guys are behind bars the rest of their life.